Coming up on this week's episode of Hip Hop Now podcast, Vanilla Ice didn't write his one hit. Imagine that. Ice Cube, Snoop Dogg, Too Short, and E40 finally dropped their new supergroup album in the Metaverse. And yes, let's talk about that top 200 greatest albums list from Rolling Stone. We're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about the gentrification of hip-hop. Just start the show.
But let's get right to the business.
Read these headlines. This album must be gone. This album must be gone.
Classic album.
Come to Hip Hop Podcast. What up, y'all? I am your host, Vegas, and this is Hip Hop Now Podcast, a podcast designed to catch you up on all things hip-hop, music, and culture that happen throughout the week. Big shout out to the people who produce this show, and you can become a producer, and receive bonus content like my full thoughts and breakdown of the top 200 list, which is currently, and for a pretty long time, exclusive to those that support the show over at patreon.com/hiphopnow. And if you are confused by how quickly that went and you didn't write it down because you don't own a pen or you couldn't type it in your phone quick enough, the link to my Patreon page is in the description of this very episode you're listening to. Just click on it. It'll take you right there. You can keep listening while you visit the site. Big shout out to allhiphop.com, hiphopdx.com, thesourcemagazine.com, and a couple of other places where I'm getting some of these stories from. Let's get right into the business because we got a lot of business today. So, Vanilla Ice has responded to the claims that he did not write his biggest hit, Ice Ice Baby, which I wouldn't be surprised, but Ice Spice Baby is so simple. I am surprised. Let's see what he said. This is what Vanilla Ice had to say on Twitter. I'm just surprised he's going by Vanilla Ice on Twitter, but I get it. He's verified. He sold a lot of records. Suge Knight, garbage. This is what Vanilla Ice said. We already know he got hung off the balcony. Now put your fanny pack on and dancing shoes and let's kick it. I have no idea, y'all, what Vanilla Ice is talking about, but he is responding to a ghostwriter named Mario Chalk Johnson, who claims to have written the song you love, but the Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity doesn't. Ice Ice Baby. This is what Mario Johnson had to say, I believe. We had a problem that when the record came out, I was sent to Texas to work with him on the album. I did 9 songs and he was supposed to pick 5 that I was getting paid for, but he ended up picking all 9 on the album. That is criminally terrible, but we are talking about Vanilla Ice. Now, if you're young and you like to listen to this podcast because you feel like you learn a little bit more about hip hop, and when I say young, I'm not talking about you old cats who still go to the club and you look old and young because you dye your beard and hair, but you still look old somehow, like a balled up version of your younger self, like crinkled, right? Like you took the clothes out to dry and left them balled up. I'm going too far, but I know. But I'm saying nobody cares if Vanilla Ice had a ghostwriter, and let me tell you why. First of all, Vanilla Ice was what some people like to label white rappers in general in hip hop. Fair for some, unfair for others. Beastie Boys unfair, right? If that was the case. Eminem, unfair if that was ever the case. But Vanilla Ice is 1,000% everything you would think, right? Culture appropriation, right? We're not even going to get into that. But Ice Ice Baby was a huge hit. Why? Because he was a gateway into hip hop for some people. For some, not all white fans like Vanilla Ice. Don't get it twisted. But for a lot who may have been afraid of hip hop back then and needed something to like, Ice Ice Baby was it. So for him to have a ghostwriter, it means nothing, because at the end of the day, the whole Ice Ice Baby thing was a Alpha Phi Alpha thing. And according to this dude, Mario, he wrote it along with 8 other records. Vanilla Ice was never, at no point in time, considered a serious MC, even if he wrote his biggest hit, Ice Ice Baby. It would not matter. We've never considered him when he was hot, and we don't consider him today. Moving on. Black Rob was honored with a street named after him in Harlem recently. This is pretty dope because the same thing happened for Big L. But at the same time, you kind of wish they were here to see it. And it's, at the same time, I understand Black Rob's situation, right? And Big L, right? Black Rob more than Big L. Black Rob was able to release albums and see huge success as a soloist. So, maybe to his block, he deserves it. But Big L was one of those dudes who people loved. And he really only had one album. And he never really got that shine, that look he needed. When he was going to sign to Rockefeller, that was like one of the best things that could possibly happen for him, because, him and Jay-Z are cool, and, it just would have worked at that point in time. But unfortunately, it never happened. He was starting to get hot again, and it just never happened once he got murdered. But the street naming is a dope idea. It's a great way to keep the names of these hip hop stars alive, and their contributions. I think Big Pun got a street naming before also. Somebody else, I think Remy Ma. I don't know. In some cases, they might just be giving them joints out. I'm about to go get one. But nevertheless, Black Rob, considering the way he went out, man, it's kind of sad, because some people pass away on celebrity status, right? Maybe you haven't seen them in a while and they were sick, but you didn't know. So the last time you saw them was like in a video or in a movie, and that's your last memory of them until you find out they passed away because they've been sick all this time. Well, Black Rob, we didn't know he was sick like that until he was very close to death. And that was when we could see him. And I believe it was because he needed help with his hospital bills, and that kind of went viral. But then the brother passed, and he probably needed help with his hospital bills a long time ago. And the scary part about that is, and not that any record label or any record label owner is obligated to take care of their I don't think Black Rob was on that label anymore. I think he was on Duck Down or something like that. But like it's not on the label like a Bad Boy, from which we know him from, to take care of these artists afterwards. It's just not, it's I mean, I'm gonna get in my wrestling bag, but I don't know what's changed about wrestling, but wrestling has a lot of, make your money and do right by your money, because there's no benefits or there's no this or that or whatever. So you got to be smart with your money. And in a lot of cases, when it comes to hip hop, when it comes to music in general, and some of these people who are talented and get pulled off the streets, it's just way more attractive to know that you can make this music by signing this deal and get out of poverty quick. But because you come from places where, there's no structure as far as economic literacy and stuff, financial literacy, or whatever way you want to phrase that, to prepare these cats for in the event you become a millionaire, you know what to do with it beyond spending. You know, even some cats may try to save money, and sometimes saving money won't work because you got to spend it in order to move right. And then depending on how popular you are, you got to get security. And there's always an answer or a reason or a different way to do things to preserve your money. And knowing how to invest is another one as well. So not to get too deep into it, but when you think about what happened to Black Rob and him being honored in this way, it's great, but I can't help but to think about watching that video of him in the hospital bed, basically dying and asking for help. It's just terrible to think about. Same thing, with Craig Mack. And I know I'm naming all bad boy artists, but I'm telling you, it's happened throughout the history of the music industry. I'll give you one of the greatest examples that's not a hip hop artist, and then I'll move along. And that's Marvin Gaye. Marvin Gaye was shot and killed by his father, but he was living with his parents in the 80s. All the hits that you know from Marvin Gaye, from back to his Motown days all the way up to Sexual Healing, had already been out. And he was living with his parents when he died. So let that sink in. Ice Cube, Snoop Dogg, Too Short, and E40's Mount Westmore album, Bad MFs, is here. The name of the album is Bad MFs, okay? But it's out. It's out now. But only if you're in the Metaverse. Now, this is on hiphopdx.com, so you can go visit their website and, check it out some more, read about it. But nevertheless, I'll just sum it up for you. If you're a hip hop head, and maybe you're old school, you probably think to yourself, what the hell is the Metaverse? Well, the Metaverse is a virtual space that people hang out and drop albums and do concerts and sell NFTs and stuff like that. Put it this way. If you support over at patreon.com/hiphop now, you know that I released an exclusive episode for those people around the Black Star new album and the Kanye West album, Donda 2, which were available via digital spaces. Donda 2, you get the hockey puck thing, so I know that's not digital, but you know what I mean. And the Black Star album, you had to subscribe to Luminary to get it. The podcasting platform, subscription-based podcasting platform. And this is no different. All it is trying to get the bag before you release it on streaming services, because like I know, you're not getting a bag if streaming services is the only resource you have for releasing your music. Independent, $35 an album, and selling one album, rappers and other musicians or whatever get this. You know why? Because they tend to release their music on Bandcamp first. Why? Because you can pay them directly for it. And they can make money. But once they put it on the streaming services, it opens up the option that they're not either going to see a dime because it's not streaming that much, right? Or they may see a little bit of something, but you're going to have to be a megastar to even see a decent check from a Spotify or whatever. That's what this is. And it's kind of disappointing when you think about it, because I know there were some people who wasn't really checking for this. I really dug the first single a lot. And I felt like, I was somewhat curious to see what the entire album would sound like. And here I am, throughout the week, looking at the news, see that the album was released, but it's released in the Metaverse, a place in which I do not dwell. I know you can find me on everything on social media at Vegas World INC. But the Metaverse is one place I haven't been hanging out. And maybe I need to be there, right? Maybe there's a benefit. Maybe the podcast can grow. Maybe people who are over there, like listeners or fans or whatever, who are more engaged by that place because it's new and it's different. I don't have the answer, but all I know as a fan of Ice Cube and Snoop Dogg and Too Short and E40 to a point, I wanted to hear this album. I was curious. Now, we all know there are ways to acquire the album without entering the Metaverse, but not everyone is going to do those things in order to hear the album. They're just going to say, oh, it's not on Spotify, or oh, it's not on Apple Music or Tidal, and then they will forget about it until it's eventually released. So we'll see. When it comes out, I'm going to check it out. When it's available elsewhere, I'll check it out. And I'll probably give my impressions on this podcast. So stay tuned. Keep subscribed to the podcast to check that out when it's eventually posted. The RZA is back in his Bobby Digital bag, and he's releasing a graphic novel and soundtrack to accompany the novel in July. And the first single just dropped called We Push. Now, RZA recently this year released I guess you could call it an EP with DJ Scratch, which for me was cool. It was cool, you know. Didn't blow my mind, but I wasn't always the biggest fan of RZA's solo anyway. But I was always curious about the people who love the Bobby Digital stuff. And I'm not going to lie, I'm still curious. And I think I'm usually curious because I want the beats to be them RZA beats from the past. Will they be that? I have no idea. But I am anticipating the album, and I think it's encouraging, right? When's the last time you got 2 projects from RZA within the same year, months apart? Sounds like a Wu album might be on the way. Hopefully Supreme Clientele 2 is actually on the way. Who knows? But we will find out eventually. And lastly, and as I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this here. I'm going to give my general thoughts. But if you would like to hear my full thoughts on Rolling Stone's the top 200 greatest hip-hop albums of all time, you got to go to patreon.com/hiphop now, because that's the kind of content I like to reserve for those that help support the podcast, because they keep the podcast going. That's one of the benefits, just one of the benefits. But for the sake of Hip Hop Now podcast, this is news. And you know why it's news? Because this has to be hands down the craziest hip hop list from a publication I've ever seen. I've had discussions with various people as to why. Now, for those who have no clue and have just heard people talking about this list on hip hop Twitter and all of that, that's a podcast that I have. You should check it out. Subscribe today. But Rolling Stones put out a top 200 greatest hip hop album of all time list. And this is what it says. I'm on the website. These are the albums that have defined hip hop history, from Run DMC to Playboi Carti, from G-Funk to Drill, from the Bronx to Houston and beyond. Now, they came up with this list also based off of, their team. They had a team, right? The Culture Council came up with this list. They'll be on the cover of my bonus episode. You better believe that. But it came up with this list as a committee. And what's so controversial about it for hip hop heads is, for one, it's Rolling Stones, right? So who are you? This is the publication that gave A Tribe Called Quest's Midnight Marauders 2 out of 5 stars, when everyone knows, and this is back in '93 when they did that, when everyone knows everyone knows that if you had to say what are the two best undeniable classic albums from A Tribe Called Quest, it is Low End Theory and Midnight Marauders. And they gave it a 2 out of 5. Not even close to being a classic. That's garbage. But nevertheless, I digress. Bars. But what made this list in particular crazy is because of where they placed lesser albums compared to like standard, this is a classic, this is one of the top 10 hip hop albums for all times albums. It's the placement that's crazy. The one that stands out the most, because I'm not going to get too into it. Again, patreon.com/hiphop now. If you want to hear me go through the list. Because we're not going to go through all of it, but we're going to go through most of it on the bonus episode. Patreon.com/hiphop now. I'm going to stop selling because it's not selling. It's, you know what I mean. But Cardi B's debut album, only album as far as I know, is ahead of Illmatic, Doggy Style, The Chronic, anything from Tupac, any Tupac album. Cardi B is ahead of him. It's really crazy. And there's been a lot of talk about it, and this is no fault of Cardi B. It's just when you look at the placement of the albums, you sort of feel like they were just loading it up for some reason with any album and placing it anywhere on the list. And when you have that, they have that much space and you just place in any album, and I heard The Game was mad because the documentary wasn't there. I'm not mad at him. This is 200 albums, and they put a bunch of albums on there to the point where you don't know what their thinking was. Besides, the thing is when you look at the placement, you'll start to think to yourself, they did this on purpose because they wanted Vegas to talk about it. Well, this is a news podcast, so of course I would talk about it. But this is really strange. So when it comes to this list, obviously do not take it seriously. This is Rolling Stones magazine. I already gave you reasons why not to. But nevertheless, it's still interesting to think about, because is this done on purpose, or is this the perception of a new hip hop wave that's going to decide that Cardi B's album is better than The Chronic? It's not, literally. And then it comes down to, well, what were those determining factors? Sales? Can't be. Because some of the albums that are in that top 10 aren't like the biggest selling albums of all time. This list would look very different if it was about sales only. Spoiler alert, the Notorious B.I.G.'s Ready to Die is number 1. I don't know if I agree with that, and I'm a Biggie fan. He's my favorite rapper. Number 1? It's really strange, y'all. But again, if you want to hear more of my thoughts and a breakdown of the majority of the list, visit patreon.com/hiphop now, or just click on the link to that website in the description of this episode you're listening to. That's going to do it for me for this week. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at VegasWorldINC. And please know that this podcast, Hip Hop Now Podcast, is available wherever you like to listen to podcasts. All you have to do is type in the search bar, Hip Hop Now Podcast, hit the subscribe button, and stay locked into weekly hip hop content. Until next time, y'all, I am not a critic. I'm a fan. Peace.